easy. And Sheila, what's the most important thing you want me to say? I'm not going to do a full introduction of you two, but what's the most, right?
Oh, my film was here last year. That's right. I wrote for you in film comment.
Film comment, okay. That's right, you had a film here last year. Okay.
Sounds right.
Yep.
Check it out on Ebertfest.
This one seems heavier than the other. See, I don't think.
This one seems lighter.
Oh, it seems lighter. It seems heavier than me. So okay.
Yeah, you had good. Was that currently one of the two pieces of things you can carry?
Julia. Help me welcome Miss Julie Dash.
Thank you. Thank you.
And as you know, we have a tradition of giving the golden thumb. And as you saw on the screen beforehand, Siskel and Ebert gave you 2 thumbs up. So now here's an additional thumb.
Thank you for this thumb. I will treasure it. This means a great deal to me.
So I'm going to invite on the stage with us Sheila OMalley, who writes for RogerEbert.com and Film Comment. And you may remember she had a short film here last year, Sheila OMalley. And I'm also inviting someone else who loves this film so much, For Gozo. I mentioned his name. He wasn't here earlier. He was the one who actually started coming when he was a high school student, and now he's fully grown. So anyway, he has a podcast called Talk Easy, For Gozo. Sheila, you take the seat. I'll get the chair.
Okay.
You can, in fact, will
I'll
Sam
sit.
start, and I'll have them bring a chair.
How we feeling?
Good. What a day.
What a day.
First Ava and the 13th. Then daughters. Yeah, intense.
I wanted to start, there's a lot of places to start because the movie is so wonderful. I wanted to start with 1988. You had written the script and now you were trying to secure financing to make this possible. But it wasn't exactly easy.
It wasn't exactly easy to acquire financing for this film because of the subject matter, and people kept saying things like, well, is it like Sounder? Is it like this? Is it like, and it was like, no. And then some people were saying, well, it's been done 100 times before. And I said, no, this is really a turn of the century piece. But I had the support and love from so many female filmmakers, from Women Make Movies, Deborah Zimmerman's Women Make Movies in New York. They held a benefit for me, and we raised $5,000 to start. And then it just went on from there. We put together little bits of money here and there, NEA money. And then I shot a trailer.
Right. It was 10 minutes long.
Yeah, a 10-minute trailer that Lynn Holst at American Playhouse saw. And American Playhouse was doing television movies at the time, but then they did 4 theatrical films. And they chose Daughters of the Dust to do as a theatrical. Now, originally, I wanted to do it as a silent movie. They didn't really want to do that. And I understand why, So I wrote dialogue, and I worked with Lynn Holst and Lindsay Law, who was the executive producer. And they were wonderful. And we went down to the Sea Islands and started working, and
now we're here.
Now we're here.
Where did you get the idea to do this, and why were you interested in the Gullah people?
Okay, I was interested in the Gullah. Well, first of all, I've always loved foreign films. And I came up through film schools and viewing foreign films, and I was saying, why can't I see something about African American people that's authentic, that's real to me? And it was like, hey, wait a minute, my family, they're Gullah Geechee, they're different. And so I started doing research while I was at UCLA, and that was very easy because of the research labs they had and the scholars. And I came across these wonderful books, Drums and Shadows, and all of these oral histories from the WPA. And so I just started pulling interesting tidbits about the culture and the cuisine and the religion and all these fascinating things about the culture that you just never see on television or in the movies. And I just wove that together into a story.
What's so interesting is, and I was thinking about it when I was watching 13th, is sort of how cinema has created the images of African Americans. So you get the Civil War as Gone with the Wind, and that if anything deviates from that, it's like, wait a minute, you're reacting to a film as opposed to. So did you run into? I've read stuff about people being like, "What's with the white dresses?" It's like,
even beyond
and the
that,
Indigo.
Even beyond that, some of the cast members, the extras, they were insisting upon tying their heads up like Aunt Jemima, but that was created for Going with the Wind. That is not how you tie your head up. Is at night, today, or anytime. That was created. And the white dresses, that disturbed a lot of people, because when you usually see African Americans, especially in historical drama, they're either in an agrarian situation, they're working. You don't see them on a Sunday, a day off, a celebration, a feast. And so they're saying, where they get these white dresses from? Well, those white dresses were of the Gibson girl style, so they were like 15 years older than the time period, than 1902. So they were hand-me-downs that were put together, and we made sure that all the edges were tattered. So they were very old dresses, and I got the idea of dressing them that way from still photographs from the period that I got at Penn Center on St. Helena Island. They have a whole library of photographs from the turn of the century, and it was like, so I didn't create anything, I didn't make anything up, we just recreated those costumes.
But wasn't there some executive that said they didn't know of that history that you were exploring?
Many executives said things like, they would have to check on it.
They
said,
right.
I've never heard of that. We'll have to check
The
on
check
it.
on
and
it,
get back to you.
Did they ever check on it?
I don't know, because they never got back to me.
Or that the concept of it was all cotton, and you have these beautiful images of Indigo and their stained hands, and it was just so evocative of.
Right, the stained hands, that's my favorite part. I decided, since I had seen so many films in the past about periods of enslavement, that I had had enough of seeing the whip marks on people who had been enslaved. Not to say, I don't want to be callous about it, but I decided I needed another way of showing the scars of slavery, because I had felt that we had seen it so many times, the whip marks, that we had become anesthetized to the trauma. to the horror of it. And so what new way could I show the scars of slavery? And I said, well, they worked in the indigo fields for so many years. Let's have their hands permanently stained blue, even though it would have washed off. But the indigo dyes that they processed, it was very poisonous, so people had rashes and all things like that. So anyway, so I used indigo as a leitmotif throughout the film with the bows, and indigo was the color of the theme.
Can you tell us a little bit about the difference? Because when we think about slavery and that period, we think about cotton and cotton fields. Tell us about the significance of indigo.
Well, indigo was the first cash crop that helped to build colonial America. It was indigo, and then it was rice. The indigo was processed in the Sea Islands, and then the dyes were shipped to Europe because at the time, every military uniform was blue around the world, so they needed that indigo dye that could only be, processed and grown in the New World, in Barbados, and in Africa.
The film was received pretty well. It played at Sundance, right? And in the aftermath of the movie doing well there, you and I talked about earlier how a lot of people in their careers were jump-started by that festival, but there was some reluctance on behalf of the studios to engage with your film.
I guess they were afraid, what was I going to do next? Yes. I did not, I was able to do about 5 different movies for television, but I was never able to do another feature film. As much as I pitched it and wrote, screenplays and took it around, I was never able to do another feature film.
Even today, this looks like an experimental film. 26 years later, it was really quite visionary. Tell us about some of the elements, why you have the structure you have, and how you came up with that at the time.
Okay, like I said, I wanted to do a film that was so authentic to African American culture that it felt like a foreign film. So I came up with a new kind of structure. If anyone here is familiar with an African griot is a person who comes from a long line of men who recall and recount family histories, and they recall them doing weddings, deaths, birthing ceremonies, etc. So I came up with what I call my griot structure. And basically it was to create these vignettes that would play throughout the story, and that was it, non-linear.
The other day, I'm sorry, I just reminded me, when you were on the panel the other day that was sponsored by the Alliance for Inclusion and Respect, and just about every professor, I know there is Professor Todd Rindelman who teaches in Seattle, he said that he uses this as in his film class and uses it as a bridge, I think, between American films and foreign films. I think there was another professor, I can't remember, who said he teaches, and every person on that panel said that they had either used or been influenced by your film. There was even someone on the panel who said that she thought perhaps the birth of her child had been influenced by the film. So it's not, I actually had a question. I don't have a question anymore. I just wanted to say, how many people have the influence of this film? I just wanted to emphasize.
I can think of one person in particular. I think you should tell the Beyonce. I mean, I think Beyonce and Lemonade was something that, can you just talk about the day that video came out?
Oh, the day that Lemonade dropped, my website shut down. And we couldn't understand what was happening, had I not paid the bill or what. And then someone said, well, no, Lemonade was on HBO, and there's some scenes that seem reminiscent, then, you know, some themes, that visual themes that seem reminiscent of Daughters of the Dust. So I guess people were cross-checking, and that's why it shut down. When I finally was able to see Lemonade, I was like, oh, I was so taken by the story, by the courageousness, the boldness, the artistic courageousness of Beyonce that I forgot to look for images of Daughters of the Dust in it, and I was just taken by that wave of emotion, and so.
I was just surprised that you had no idea that she was going to use those images. Like, it was news. Your friends were calling you and telling you, like, hey, have you checked on HBO?
I missed it, and it had a short run on HBO, and then it was closed down, so I missed it. You know.
I know some of the, I mean, I just think this is a masterpiece, and it is like one of my favorite Latin phrases is sui generis. It's like one of a kind. It doesn't exist. It is its own thing. It's ahead of its time, but it's also timeless. Like, we haven't either caught up, or it is so much your vision. So I guess I wanted to ask, I know you had an amazing team. Carrie Marshall, who's just incredible.
Carrie James Marshall did
I
the
can't
production
believe that
design.
He's an
Carrie J.
amazing
Marshall was
painter.
your production designer.
Yeah, he's
He's one
incredible.
of the most famous artists around today. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
a living artist, if you're familiar with Carrie Marshall's work, and I forgot that he
I
was
wish
just-
I had bought a Carrie painting, but back then, because now they're selling for like $5 million.
Yeah, he's so.
You missed out.
Yeah, he was just on the cover of the New York Magazine. Anyway,
And Michael Kelly Williams.
so yeah,
as
I wanted
well.
to ask about how you got your team, how you worked with them, how do you communicate this very sui generis vision to your team?
Well, it was a collaboration, very much a collaboration between myself, Carrie James Marshall, and Arthur Jaffa, who was a cinematographer. And he also, AJ, he also did the restoration. You know, he color timed it. So, for the
And
new
your
one, yeah.
partner at the time.
Yes, he was.
That's the last thing.
We were married at the time. That's what he's trying to do.
You were really downplaying that.
Sam's telling all your secrets.
Yes, it's a little dicey working together all the time. Okay. Fabulous cinematographer, though, and artist. So, yeah, we worked as a team in Los Angeles, and then we went down on location, and we had whole rooms full of tear sheets of the Suriname rainforest, of the indigo pots, how it was done in Senegal and Nigeria, and we just kind of, this film is like an amalgamation of everything that's African diasporic, you know. So a lot of it is extremely authentic, but a lot of it is an amalgamation of ideas and cultural traditions and crafts and skills.
Was it hard? Sorry. This is a really quick one, but okay, like the surf is roaring. How do you get the sound of their voices when they're on the beach? Was that difficult?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, how did they do
we
that?
We had to do some voiceovers. We
Yeah.
couldn't afford much,
No, but
but
you
we had
really-
to revoice after, you know, in post-production.
You do feel like you're on that
Yeah.
beach, though, so it's
Yeah,
great.
but it was the sudden squalls, the rainfalls that were like difficult. But I had read in a book written by John Sayles, the filmmaker, that always keep in your pocket some rain scenes. So whenever it would start rain, I'd reach in my pocket and pull out, oh, we're going to switch to scene 42 where it rains, you know. And so that worked.
That's so funny.
I love that you use the device of it being narrated by someone who was not born, and that you would see the spirit of her come to infuse to become part of the family with everyone. Where did that come from?
Oh, I just made that up because I was just trying to think, how could I wanted it to be narrated by more than, well, let me back up a bit. Having been trained professionally as a screenwriter, I know you're not supposed to have more than one narrator, and certainly not by anyone who's not alive yet, unless it's Sunset Boulevard. So yeah, right, yeah, that was, or the film DOA or Sunset Boulevard. I knew this. But I wanted to represent ancient to the future, so I wanted it to be narrated by the elderliest person and the youngest. And who's the youngest? That would be the unborn child. So I think also when I was pitching the story around and people would read the unborn child in the screenplay, they would say, how can you have an unborn child speaking, or
They were
walking
confused
around?
by that.
Yeah.
You mentioned how the film is being often watched in class, and I wanted you to tell this story about you move from Queensbridge to Harlem and you go to school, and the first day of your cinematography class, you are asked to watch a movie. What movie was that?
Can I back up a little further?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so we moved from Queensbridge to Harlem, and I started taking a cinematography workshop at the Studio Museum of Harlem. Unbeknownst to me, I thought cinematography meant still photography. So I was there for about 2 weeks before I realized it wasn't still photography, it was cinematography, it was motion pictures. One of the first foreign films I saw there as a high school student was Eisenstein's The Battleship Potemkin. Russian, black and white, silent, with subtitles. So of course we're sitting there chewing gum with our gaylays on, complaining about why I got to read this film, 10 minutes into it, we were just taking, everyone was silent. They stopped complaining, stopped chewing gum, our faces just dropped, and we just watched it to the end, and from that point on, I was hooked.
Except you had to pretend to not
I
like
had to tell my friends, that's nothing. Yeah, right, yeah.
Should we open it up to some questions?
Yes.
That was a reluctant yes.
Well, the reason it's reluctant is because I wanted to ask about the people who stayed behind and the people who left. I wanted to know, did you do, much research on the people who stayed behind, the people who left? What were the differences and what were some of the considerations in the movie? Because sometimes I could guess some of their motivations and sometimes I couldn't.
Yeah, and it's also the irony, because they're migrating north, it's part of the Great Migration, and you know where they're going. The audience knows where they're going. They're going up to the Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. They're going up to live in the ghettos. Yeah. Had they stayed behind, they had everything they needed. But in everyone's life, in all different cultures and traditions, younger generations want to move on. They want to be part of, it was the Industrial Revolution was like hot, they wanted to be a part of that. And it was usually a one-way trip. You don't travel that far to go north and then ever come back. It's just when you're gone, you're gone. So it's bittersweet. It was bittersweet, and I think they considered all these things, and that's why I also had Trula, who was from Nova Scotia, a person of color from Nova Scotia. She didn't stay behind. She had to continue on to her journey as well to go back to Canada, having worked in New Orleans with Yellow Mary as prostitutes. Yeah.
To your right on the floor.
Right.
Hi there, thanks so much for coming. Something that really played to me about this film, like you said, a foreign film, was the texture of the dialect that your actors portrayed. And I thought that it was very immersive. And I was wondering if you could just speak on researching that and directing that with your actors.
Okay, we hired Ron Days, who was also an actor in the film. We hired him to write the script phonetically, rewrite it phonetically, the dialogue for the actors, and he also worked as a dialogue coach. He's from the region, and he was also working with a group who were, at the same time, they were translating the Bible into the Gullah dialect. So I knew he would be a good resource, and he was. And then he and his wife went on to produced Gullah Gullah Island after that. The TV show, the cartoon. Yeah.
Oh, we have a question right to your left on the floor.
Hello, my name is Pierre Smith, and I'd like to deviate just a little bit to the work you're doing today. And full disclosure, I'm a proud alumna of Spelman College, and I wanted to get your perspective on your experience teaching young women of color to use the tools to tell and preserve their own stories, and what that experience has been like for you as a person who's created a classic work of art and teaching young women of color how to do that for themselves.
I enjoy it, and I'm going to be there for a while. This was my first year at Spelman College. I just kind of completing that. I had offers to go elsewhere, but I thought I should go to Spelman because that's what I needed to do. I needed to share my experiences and help a new generation, to assist in emerging filmmakers. You know, I taught at Wayne State, I taught at Morehouse and Howard University, but I think Spelman College is a great place to be.
Question?
Floor, second row.
Hi, thank you again. Thank you for coming to the festival, and this is a beautiful film. Tone poem is the way that Roger and Jean described it, and I think that's a very apt description of it. It's very pretty. It's a very pretty film. You know, despite the anguish that was in it. What was the upset? I'm sorry, I was trying to figure it out. There was a woman who came. I can't remember her character name, but she was, I think, very religious. What was the anguish there that she was feeling?
Well, Aunt Viola, who's very much a Christian missionary, who was someone who had left the island as a child and went to the mainland and was very much involved with being a Christian missionary. And she was shut off to a lot of things, and especially she thought she was bringing Mr. Sneed, the photographer, back to introduce science and technology to her backwood relatives. And then there's a turnaround at the end where he's actually kissing the hand, the hoodoo hand created by her great-grandmother, because after spending a day, he recognized that perhaps there was something missing in his life that Christianity wasn't fulfilling. And then just a play of the Christian sensibilities, Christianity and or the Protestant sensibilities against the whole thing with Bilal Muhammad. There are known, you never see this in films out of Hollywood, but there were quite a few African captives who were taken and into slavery who were of the Muslim faith, and they continued to practice. Bilal Muhammad was one such person. As a child, he was brought into the Sea Islands, and he attempted to recreate the Quran by bleaching pages and writing, but he was writing that Bilal Muhammad's Quran is at the Smithsonian. But he wrote, his Arabic was written like a child would write it. So he was continuing to practice his faith from where, that his parents taught him. But it was, he continued to speak it like a child and to write it like a child. So what the purpose of that was just to show that everyone who was living there, they came from so many different ethnic groups out of West Africa. Everyone assumes that they all came from the same tribe and they were speaking the same language. That is not true. You had whole families that each person in the family, mother, father, cousin, uncle, spoke a different ethnic variety from a West African language. So there was a lot of cross-cultural things that were going on during the period of enslavement that we're still dealing with.
From the balcony to your right.
Thank you, as everyone has said, for coming. I was sort of struck this first time I've seen the film. We saw Belle yesterday, and it seemed to me that the similarity is that the culture was handed down by the women through generations in Belle, and I believe I saw that in your film too. Am I seeing that correctly?
Yes, women are the carrier. In every culture, I think women are the carriers of traditions and beliefs. They keep little things in their pockets. They keep little tin cans filled with, a button or a lock of hair, an old photograph. Men don't usually tend to do that. so as a result, women become the carriers of passing down the traditions and culture and little recipes.
I have a question on the floor to your right or left.
Can you tell us something about Gloria Naylor's involvement on location?
Okay. Gloria Naylor had just purchased a home on St. Helena Island while we were in pre-production. And she came to our production office and she said she wanted to learn how to make a film and could she, work as a production assistant. And I said, but you're Gloria Naylor. You're a novelist, you're famous. She said, just let me come. I said, okay, I figured she'd come 1 or 2 days. Gloria Naylor came every single day, and we were there, before sunrise and after the sunset. We didn't have any lights to use, so we just worked in sunlight. And I promised her that I would not exploit her name, to say stamped up that Gloria Naylor worked on this film, but if you read the credits, you could see her name rolls. So she was there and very much a part of the making of Daughters of the Dust. Yeah.
Question?
To your left, far right, or far left?
Right?
Far you're far right.
Right over here, Chaz.
The other left. I do that all the time. Thank you so much for this film. This is my first time seeing it. I'm definitely going to have to watch it again and probably again after that, just to pick up all the little bits in it, because there's so many layers in it. But the very first thing that struck me was the opening with the verses from Thunder Perfect Mind. I was wondering if you could
recognize Thunder Perfect Mind
instantly.
The Gnostic Gospels.
Yeah. Could you? How is it? Just because you love that, or is there some connection with the culture?
Well, it was perfect. The dialogue was perfect, and I also used the segment where Eula Pazant is speaking about the Ebos, and you see Eli Pazant walking on water towards the figurehead. That is, I purchased that from Paula Marshall from Praise Song for a Widow. Because I had written my own little passage, and then someone said, well, Paula Marshall wrote that too. You should read hers, and I read hers, and hers was better. So I said, let's get in touch with her, let's license this from her, and plug that in. And so Paula Marshall and Thunder Perfect Mind were 2 pieces that we purchased.
We have time for
Gnostic Gospels, we didn't have to pay anything.
one more question. In the
Thank you.
Well, all right. I can ask something if I... Okay, go ahead.
Okay, very good question. She's asking about the Native American character, St. Julian Last Child, as I call him. Before the Americans arrived, before the enslaved people arrived to the islands, sea islands, it was a land called Chicora. It was Cherokee territory, and they had lived there for centuries. Those same Cherokee were marched to Oklahoma. So that prior to the bringing in the African captives to work the land, the way I see it in my world, there are always maroons. There are always people who hold out, who didn't go on that forced march, who didn't drink the Kool-Aid, who did not believe they were marching to a better place, who resisted. And I see that particular character in his family as having resisted, having stayed behind. And and falling in love with one of the daughters. And I actually wrote a sequel, a novel, called Daughters of Dust. We won't talk about that now. The publishing company called it Daughters of Dust, but it's a sequel to this movie, and it talks about that family that comes from Iona and St. Julian Last Child.
Do you have any hope of making that into a movie?
Oh, I tried. One day, perhaps one day, it gets wonderful write-ups in the agencies, but then, you know, like the agents say, oh, that'll make a great movie, excellent, 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 but nothing has come of it. So there's so many other projects that I want to work on, so let it go.
The last thing I want to ask before we have to go, you have made so much, and if you guys have not seen her short films, a lot of them are online. For Women, Illusion, plug them all, yeah.
Diary of an African Nun, but then some of the longer ones too, like the Rosa Parks story and Love Song and Funny Valentines and Incognito. And
I guess I want to know, what do you want to do with the rest of your career? And if that's too sentimental of a question, you can say so.
It's not too sentimental. I want to continue to write. I want to continue to direct, but I also want to start producing for younger directors, emerging. Yeah.
I hope you do that. Thank you so much, Julie.
Oh, it's Julie Dash.